and welcome to part 2 of Winter Reflections. In this part of the 2-part video, I'm going to talk about practice a bit more. If you want to go back and see part 1, where I talk through all of the decks that I worked with over the course of the winter, I'll link that down below or somewhere where things are linkable, I don't know. It's the video right before this one, if that also helps. So a big chunk, probably the most prominent chunk of my winter practice that I want to talk about is my work with Persephone, because this was the first season that I worked with her, and I wanted to kind of, even just for my own records, kind of just speak to how that all evolved and how I worked with the decks that I sort of attribute to working with her energy, and that are pretty much her decks now at this point. And it's very much the descent aspect of her in these 3 decks that I'm going to get into. But the first thing that I want to cover before I get into the cards is some of the extra stuff that goes along with my practice. The biggest or most significant thing of which is my journals, because for me, journaling, the card work and everything really wouldn't have nearly as much value without the journaling practice. So that's why I kind of want to start with it quickly, and then I'll circle back to it at the end once we kind of go through card work. So I have 3 journals here. Typically, I'm really mainly working with my one main journal, but the first one on top here is just a notepad that I keep with me pretty much at all times. This just acts as a place where I can put down my initial impressions when I lay cards out, or if I have thoughts or a question I want to ask, but maybe it's kind of like a side tangent and I'm not writing it in here. It's just something to note things down on. I kind of refer to this as my High Priestess notepad because I'm pretty much using it just like, say I pull some cards and I just need somewhere to land my thoughts, or if I get any auditory or any kind of visuals or whatever I notice first, I just write down in here without any concern for how it looks, or if I decide to scratch stuff out or whatever the case may be. It also acts as a really great place when I pull cards and I don't necessarily have time to fully journal, where I can just have those couple of notes of my initial impressions, and that way I can refer back to it when I do have time to actually sit and properly journal, because of course that happens where you're like, oh, I'm not really sitting to journal, but then you pull a few cards and you're like, oh wow, okay, that's actually significant. I can't just let that go. Let me just note it down so I don't forget that key message that came through or whatever. So that's the High Priestess notebook. I don't worry about how it looks or anything like that. I just sort of intuitively put down my initial impressions. I'm sorry my voice is kind of not working with me today. It just is in a mood, and so we're just gonna have to deal with it. The next journal is my main journal, and you could say this is my hermit journal. This is where I actually reflect, where I synthesize my readings. It's also where I just journal my heart out. Like, it's just the landing place for everything. And I always use a paper blanks journal. I go through different ones, but I pretty much always like to use the one that has a clasp on it. They have, a handful of designs, and I kind of rotate them throughout the year. I have to say this one took longer to fill than most because a lot of things happened that were difficult to process. My brother passed away, and then even before that, I was going through some things, and then my snake passed away. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and so it's taken me a longer time to process in here because there were periods where I just couldn't even bring myself to journal. And now I'm at the last entry of this thing. And, the tail end of it has been more Persephone work, but also grief work. And I'm at that final entry, and I'm sort of delaying it, to be honest, to finish it. It's been a couple weeks, and I haven't quite finished out the entry because I haven't felt ready to move on from this journal. But I'm getting there, and it kind of leads into this next journal. because since I was sort of dragging my feet to finish this one and really close it out to start a new one, I wound up opening up this, which generally speaking has just been my big tomb for larger readings and, sticking things in and maybe not even writing about them. Deck interviews, that's the kind of stuff I was usually putting in here, or exercises. If I was doing tarot exercises, this was like a catch-all journal. But you see, I didn't, especially in the beginning, I was kind of just pasting bigger spreads in here, and I didn't even necessarily journal them. It's always a good idea to at least write out, like, if there were card positions or what the spread was or about, or, like I know these 3 cards. I can still remember this one. It was from the beginning of the year. But it's always good to at least write it out. These 2 I at least have in the other journal that was active at the time. But because I've been sort of dragging my feet on finishing my main daily journal, I kind of turned to this one, which also lended itself to working through bigger spreads. Because usually the paper blanks journal, I'm not really doing more than like a 5 card. Most of my daily readings are 3 card spreads. And if I'm pulling more cards or like a bigger spread, it would usually go into this book. But what happened initially, I mentioned this, I wound up doing a reading that was connecting with Hades, and that wound up being a really long, that was like a 13 card spread, which is huge for me. So naturally I put it in here, even though the way I kind of taped it in, I could have done it in my smaller journal. But I wound up putting it in here because it was such a big reading and I was getting close to the end of the other journal. I just didn't want to, I wasn't ready to be filling up the pages and closing out that journal so quickly. So that kind of started me working in this one, because I was like, okay, cool, I can do bigger spreads. I was starting to do daily pulls, but because I felt kind of emboldened to do bigger spreads, I went from a typical 3 card type spread that I was doing with Persephone to this bigger 9 card situation that just sort of evolved. So I'm going to get into that, but I just wanted to cover the journals and sort of the framework that I'm working in. I really generally don't like having multiple journals because I like simple. I also sometimes am traveling around. If I end up staying overnight somewhere else, which I do from time to time, I prefer to have the most minimal setup that I can bring with me so I can still have my journaling practice with me. So that's why I have tended to just keep everything in here. And generally, because I'm working with cards daily, I'm not doing bigger spreads. I'm kind of just doing littler chunks of things. But this actually really worked out to do more depth work and have more space. So I'm actually really enjoying that. So those are the journals, and I'll probably circle back to some of that stuff at the end. But what I wanted to go over quickly next is some of the other things that I use in my practice, especially with Persephone, that just add to the practice for me. They're not necessary, but for me, they add to the practice and they make this work, especially shadow worky type stuff and deity work, feel a lot more connected and smooth for me, and just in honor of Persephone. So the first thing is a devotional candle, because I've always done this with Artemis, where I've had particular candles that for me, just the scent resonates with her energy for me, and I think she would appreciate them. So it took me a minute to find this for Persephone, but this is a candle by Phantom Row that's one of my favorite candle brands. And this scent, Velvet Boudoir, to me, it just is such a quintessential, like, oh my God, I don't know. It just smells so beautifully like dark Persephone. I don't know how else to put it. I think the name is also quite fitting. The notes in this one are plum, black cherry, sugar, musk, saffron, and freesia. And that saffron, black cherry, plum thing is just, I don't know, something about it. It has that dark velvet type of vibe to it. So I really have enjoyed using this candle. The whole thing is just about done. I think I maybe am lucky if I have one burn left in it. But I did just recently acquire another one when they had a sale, so I'm good at the moment. So that is a candle that I will light when I am doing a reading with her. That's sort of bare bones, is I'll light this candle and then I'll get to card work. But if I want to add on to that, actually one more scent that I want to talk about. So this scent from Home Buddy Candle Co. is called Velvet Garden. I didn't even realize until I was putting all of this stuff together that both of these have velvet in the name, so that's kind of funny. But this one also to me is very Persephone. It's more like, compared to Velvet Boudoir, they're like similar, but this is like the light half sister, which is kind of funny because it's from her winter line, and it's like a comforting, cozy type of scent, but there's something a little lighter, a little sweeter, a little more gentle. So for me, I think this is a scent I'll be using more for the light half of the year, and I did manage to get the candle while it was on sale. So I do have that one for when I do more light half of the year work. But the next thing I wanted to talk about, again, this is something that I carried over from my work with Artemis, but I really like using meditation candles for journaling sessions, especially when it's either working with a deity or working with a specific intention where I'm cultivating something, or I want to somehow make an offering to something, or just a focus or whatever, a mini spell. You could think of it many different ways. So these candles I found on Etsy. They're from a shop called April in My Soul. I'll link everything down below, but you get 31 candles. I think it was like $24 or something like that. And they had black and red. So of course I got black and red for Persephone and Hades. They have a few other colors. I hope that they come out with more, because I like different shades of things. So I would love to see some different shades of blue and purple and green and all kinds of things. But I think there are green and blue and natural color candles. But what I particularly love about these, I think they burn about 30-40 minutes, which for me is perfect if I'm really pulling cards and I want to kind of make an offering in the form of a candle. And also, unlike a lot of meditation candles, these have the kind of shape that hopefully you can see that has like a bit of a cone shape. So there's enough room on here to carve a sigil, a name, a word, whatever you want to carve if you're into that kind of thing. So that's been fun. And, they do sort of stand up, but with anything like this, you kind of want to melt the bottom and tack it onto whatever candle dish or little holder you're using. That's kind of go-to thing. These are also, this is the other thing I love about them, they're also genuine beeswax, and you can smell like the most beautiful beeswax smell. These are like so strongly scented with beeswax that it's like no question that they're genuine beeswax, and I really love that. I prefer to work with natural beeswax wherever I can for these types of little candles. So as a meditation candle, they're great. As a little offering, they're great. The other thing to go along with these is a devotional oil that I crafted for Persephone. In part one of these videos, I mentioned the book Persephone's Pathway, and she has a recipe in there for the one that she uses. I came up with mine more intuitively because I sort of felt called to really make a specific blend. This has benzoin, patchouli, different florals, and other dry herb ingredients that I mixed into it. So for me, this is like dark half of the year chthonic edition of Persephone devotional oil, and I look forward to making a spring one. But I made this and one for Hades on the last blood moon because it just felt like the right time, And I love how this one came out. I think it really is fitting for the vibes I get from her, and I love to use this to anoint a candle and anoint my hands. For me, It's a few things. It's utilizing scent and as well as ambient music to create an atmosphere really helped me get into a place where even on days where I'm feeling off or a lot has happened and it's hard for me to sort of level down to be able to get into my practice and really sink into it, having these sort of trigger points of course I leaked it. Having these trigger points of scent and ambient music really helped me get into the headspace. And then also from the standpoint of working with Deity, it just always feels better to be making offerings. I think it's just a respectful thing to do. You know, I'm sort of, it's interesting because I'm coming to my practice from a place of having generally been agnostic throughout life. And, you know, in some ways I still am. I can't say that I know what I'm working with when I'm working with. Is it more from the Jungian perspective of a collective unconscious archetype, or is it an actual energy? I don't really concern myself with these things. Honestly, I've sort of just realized, you know, I could ponder that question for the rest of my life, really, and never, you know, in some ways have the most concrete answer, but I know it feels more proper. It feels more right to be giving offerings to something that I'm working with and investing something in if I'm expecting to get something out. So these are the sort of extra things, you know, they might not, I guess I wouldn't say they're necessary, but for me, it just adds to my practice and feels kind of weird if I don't do some of this, especially working with a deity. And speaking of ambient music, I'm going to put the couple of playlists that I really enjoy and feel connect very well with Persephone's energy or Hades, you know, depending, but I'm going to put those in the description box if you want to check those out. So I just wanted to cover those lovely things. And now we will get into working with the decks. So to get into the decks and how I worked with them, I'm going to quickly cover what the decks were in case someone didn't see part one. But first of all, the tarot deck was Tarot of Persephone's Garden by Kara Small. This is the Chthonic edition. I flipped through it more in part one. I'm not going to do much of that in this part because I just want to talk about working with the cards. But that was the main tarot deck. Then I was using Divine Nature, and this was sort of the central deck, the central oracle. And I just find that this and the messages that are in it kind of fit both aspects of Persephone pretty well. And I don't know, I just really connected with it for this practice. So that's the second deck. The third deck is Dark Mirror Oracle. This one is very much a shadow work deck. And I wanted that because while Divine Nature has some cards in it that lean shadow worky, this one really gets into the nitty gritty of more shadowed concepts, I think. And very much in reading with it, it absolutely makes you confront things. It makes you look at things. It makes you really peel back the layers or untangle the threads, which I'll get into in a bit. But those are the three decks that I worked with for Persephone. Scooted us in a bit so you can see more closely. But something I want to say also is that with this type of work, I wasn't exactly, like, as far as having a routine to this, it's not that I was trying to have a daily pull every day, because I very quickly was realizing as I worked with these decks together or in unique pair, that these were the kind of readings that you really want to sit with and take more time with. And I think that probably applies to shadow work in general when you're doing that kind of stuff. You know, it really lends itself to taking a little bit more time to sit with the reading, especially if some more difficult things are coming up, rather than just rushing through it and, you know, wanting to get on to the next pull, because I've definitely had that at points. But these decks really prompted me to slow down and to sit with the meanings and to sit with what was coming up for me and how that's really applying to my life. It wasn't just a one and done and just move on and forget the reading, which kind of goes back to the journaling practice, solidifying these things. But I wanted to mention that I took a lot more time with these cards. So it's not that I did or tried to force myself to have a daily practice. I would pull cards and sit with them for some days. The way it kind of started out, because I had at first these two decks, Divine Nature and Tarot of Persephone's Garden. Since these were the first two I had, I was usually doing a 3-card pull where I would pull a card from Divine Nature, sometimes without having any prompt on my end other than what message do I need to hear today, or what do I need to learn or focus on or explore today. And then I would pull from Tarot of Persephone's Garden. And the way that I like to do this, and honestly, I do this throughout my practice, but it also just really lends itself to Persephone. But the way I like to pull is as above, so below. So, I would use Divine Nature as the focal point. So submerge, this is about going into the unconscious and looking at, shadowy things, to be looking at the root of why certain things are coming up, or that type of a deal. And then say 7 of coins above, 2 of coins below. So this, you can kind of loosely interpret that in so many different ways. And I kept it loose intentionally because it let the cards be what they needed to be. So that was a much more open way of reading, but that's sort of what I do across a lot of decks for my daily practice. And it lended itself to this practice with Persephone. Other times I would have more specific prompts, and a lot of those came out of the first spread I did with these decks, which I may post a deck diary about. That was a pretty large spread, and it was more in depth, and it was kind of really layered with synchronicities and interesting things. But at any rate, so as far as like a sort of daily practice, but maybe better to put just the regular go-to practice, was to pull cards like this and to work with them that way. Then when I got Dark Mirror, I started doing the same thing. I just replaced Divine Nature with Dark Mirror to get to know it and to see, just to get familiar with it. I would just pull a card. A lot of times I would be journaling a bit first, just about whatever was on my mind that day. And then I would sit with Persephone and pull a card. And again, leave it fairly open-ended of what I needed to reflect on. And it was always pretty in line or very much in tandem with whatever I had previously journaled about. And I would just pull above and below and then reflect on that and journal on that. So that got me, halfway there, so to speak, I think, with my practice. And I would still do that, but now I've kind of figured out a way that I synergistically work with all three when I feel like it. And that, I'm going to pull out a spread that I had actually done, because I thought it would be fun to maybe actually see a real spread rather than riff off of one that is just spur of the moment. So at one point, and it'll also show you how I wound up using all three together, is really another reason why I want to do that. So on a given day, I think I had asked, let me check. This time I used a prompt. Let me see. Yeah, so I had gone with the prompt, what am I afraid to release and why? I pulled Answer the Call, and then from the tarot above was Judgment, and below 8 of Swords. So for me, this kind of was, what am I being called to release, or what am I afraid to release rather, and why? And the way I sort of came to think of this was, an Answer the Call and Judgment. It was sort of echoed, which is oh so funny, because I'll get to that at the end. But anyway, with Answer the Call, you're kind of walking into this bright light that you're being called to, but to do so requires you to leave behind what's familiar, right? Everything that can be easily seen, that you've already seen, that like the back of your hand in detail, has to be left behind for you to walk into this light of uncertainty, but also that calling, that truth of recognition. And why I'm afraid to release it, 8 of Swords, is of course that feeling of being stuck. Maybe it is a self-victim kind of mentality of like, there's no way for me to get free of the familiar, of the known. So what I did next and how I work with all three decks together was I pulled from Dark Mirror to kind of untangle the thread more. And that's sort of, I guess, the main thing I wanted to get across in the card work of this is, especially for shadow work, I oftentimes am thinking of it as untangling a thread or untangling a chain. So from Dark Mirror, I pulled Addicted to get a little deeper into what my resistance here is. And then from Tarot of Persephone's Garden, again, I pulled Above and Below for Addicted. And for me, this was sort of like, okay, I see Addicted's coming up. What am I addicted to and why am I addicted to it? Was how I decided to pull for this. So Addicted to Four of Swords, kind of giving up the fight. I don't want to have the mental battle anymore. I just want to be stable somewhere, take a nap, I'm not up for a fight over this sort of a thing. And I'm addicted to that sort of resistance. And then the reason why with the Emperor, also with this chain leading off to it, it kind of was coming through a few different ways for me. But one of those ways is kind of being chained to or feeling addicted to the external authorities in my life, letting other people be in charge and that sort of a deal, right? And maybe not wanting to or feeling like I'm too trapped or too tied up to be able to have my own sovereignty and take leadership of my own life. So that's sort of how I unravel the thread, so to speak. And I did want to point out the book for Dark Mirror is cryptic. If you see people talking about this deck, that was something that was coming up a lot when I was watching reviews, is people saying that the guidebook is quite cryptic. And it is, but for me, that's part of why it works. I really like the details in the cards. The moon phases reference the stage of processing that this card relates to. And in the guidebook, it mentions, okay, waxing crescent, that's the stage of depression. It gives you a phrase to go off of. It's not about choosing the chains, it's about choosing them again and again. And of course, this is tying in so perfectly with that Eight of Swords. And just this art works really well together too, because you have chains in both images. So the way that they interlock together just really worked for me between these three decks. Usually I'm using books like this, especially cryptic ones, as a bit of bibliomancy, if you will, where I'm going in and finding the one thing. Sometimes it would be this phrase that's on top of the booklet. Sometimes it's this sentence. And then sometimes it's something that's in here or multiple places. It's really resonating in a unique way. So I really like Dark Mirror. I think it's I'm so glad I got it because it works really well in this practice for me. Let's see, how do I want to explain this? So the next place I would go with this, because this is giving me context, it's making me confront things, it's opening my awareness to stuff that maybe I'm otherwise resistant to being aware of. And so that's a lot to sit with, for one, but also it kind of might leave you in a place of, okay, but now what? Now I know all of this, now what? So the last row of cards, I would turn back to Divine Nature, and I'd pull a card, and for this spread, it was Listen to Your Muse. And this is where I'm asking for guidance, essentially. Like, how do I, given all of this, what guidance is being offered to me for how to process, how to work through it, how to move past or integrate this, really? And I'm pretty sure, I have to double check my journal, but I think Above and Below was Priestess of Coins and Seven of Cups. Okay, I double checked. It was that. So for this, as guidance, we're coming back to something that came up in the very first spread I did. Listen to your muse, navigate with your heart, trust the guidance that's coming to you that defies logic in some ways. Priestess of Coins above for me is saying this is a journey you take step by step with diligence. It requires being stubborn and fired up about this mission that you're on and being really committed to it and having the diligence to keep working at it when others might give up. type of energy. That's sort of, and in this deck, Priestess of Coins, just in case you don't know, is the Knight of Coins. So again, it's like that diligent pursuit, slow and steady wins the race type of thing, taking one step at a time. And with Listen to Your Muse, this is a really beautiful image because you have the figure who's letting go of their walking stick. Obviously, their heart is being projected outward as their compass almost. And then they have the muse coming in and whispering, as a guidance, right? And then so below, beneath Listening to Your Muse and being diligent, kind of comes full circle, like I said, with the first reading I did, because we have 7 of Cups here. And I think I mentioned it in the part 1 video, but in that initial spread I did, the first tarot card down was Judgment, and the last tarot card down was 7 of Cups. And this was the keystone card of that reading that was my guidance, and it has come up repeatedly in this work of needing to cultivate discernment. So I don't want to dig super deep into this, but I sort of just wanted to show you how I've worked out the spread. The other thing I want to mention is, this is a larger spread, and because I'm working in my larger journal now, I will tend to, if I do this kind of spread, I will tend to pull it all at once. But another way to do this that I will do from time to time is to just go one row at a time and sit with the first row and journaling with it for however long you feel is needed to really parse out the depth of those cards. And then you could, on another day, on another journal entry, come in and dig deeper and process that and really sit with that. And then on a final day, maybe this is spread out throughout a week or whatever works, you could come in and what's the resolution, the guidance type of a thing. So that's pretty much how it worked. I still now will pull just 3 cards. And if I don't feel the need to go into the deep untangling of things because I get the message, then I won't, do this whole, 9 card thing. But as far as a depth spread goes, this is sort of my general framework at this point for this work. It just sort of evolved out of the practice. I didn't try to force anything. And now I work with it because I've let it evolve into this, so I'll turn to it when it feels relevant, but I don't try to force things in my practice when it doesn't feel necessary. When it comes to this spread, I've kind of coined it the descend and rise spread because you're kind of going into the deep here and then rising up at the bottom with the guidance and how to, bring it to a resolution or how to integrate the lessons that have come through and the wisdom or the information that's come through in the spread. So this is sort of the big boy spread, if you will. And I would just sit and journal with these cards and really let the meaning sink in and then reflect on what they mean for me, where they show up for me in life, how I relate to them. And, that the little High Priestess notebook is great because I can just write down my initial impressions, my initial thoughts, no filter, no trying to align things with the perfect meanings of the cards. I feel like all 3 of these decks, the artwork is very beautifully evocative and tied into the meanings of the cards, and the unique artwork gives you that nuance. With this card, 7 of Cups, you have Psyche going into Cupid's garden, and there's that idea of being at a threshold and sort of maybe getting stuck at that threshold and needing to come to terms with some things before you move through that threshold. And there's interesting nuances to play with, or like I mentioned earlier with Answer the Call and sinking into this image from Divine Nature, the book for this, I don't think it says anything specific about leaving the familiar. Maybe it does. I don't know. But that's what came through just looking at it. And that's what I wrote about was, over here, everything is defined. This is familiar. It's understandable. You know what everything is. But walking into this light, answering the call requires a level of trust which is then echoed in the advice of just closing your eyes, tilting your head back, and letting your heart guide you, and trusting that, leaning into that, letting go of your walking stick and the crutch that you've perhaps become trapped by, right? So this kind of stuff, it worked out in a really beautiful way, I think, for myself in my practice. And I'm really glad that this spread evolved as it did. Now, like I mentioned, when it came to starting this, like I would have prompts sometimes, like this one, what is it that how did I word it? What is it I'm afraid to release, and why? That, can put a different tilt on this card than if you were just kind of pulling it as a general, what message or what lesson or what thing do I need to focus on? So having a prompt can dial in a reading, but sometimes leaving it open is what felt right for me that day, because I just, maybe I had already spent like a few minutes journaling about something that was on my mind or bothering me or that I was struggling with. And then I would just start pulling cards and let that respond to where I was at emotionally, mentally. I just kind of play it by ear. I don't, like I said, I don't try to force it. I do have prompts and spreads that I will turn to and work through that are more intentional and more focused, especially this Seven of Cups has come up so much from the first time that I pulled from this deck up until now. I think I was looking back in this journal and realizing the last several pulls or spreads that I worked, it was showing up in just about every single one of them. Like it even showed up here where I was basically being told, focus on this, damn it. You need to have discernment. That's what you need to learn. And yeah, that's sort of where the practice went and how it evolved and how I worked with them. I don't know how much more specific anyone would be interested in terms of like how to journal with cards. I don't know if anyone who's somewhat new to all of this is watching. But that was sort of the general summary of things. I think one last thing I'll leave off with as far as like spreads and card work go, there was this spread that I did that I really like, that I kind of am keeping in my back pocket as one to do on when I feel called to or whatever. And that was to use the Oracle deck. And you could do this like in any kind of practice, but I would use the Oracle deck to let me know what my teacher was. What is my teacher for today, right? Transform. So transformation is my teacher today. And then I would turn to the tarot deck, and for the above, I would pull what is the lesson, and then the card below is the wisdom of that lesson. So above, the lesson, Two of Wands, the wisdom below, the High Priestess. So for this, it could be Two of Wands and transform could be talking about the lesson of coming up with a plan to change your life, right? How do you want to move past where you're at right now and make the changes that you want in your life? And are you willing to really transform things in that plan? Like, are you taking enough of the risks in coming up with that plan to transform your idea into something that can actually become something? Are you taking the steps to really consider all that has to change or that you might want to change in coming up with this new direction in life, perhaps? And the wisdom maybe of that lesson, the High Priestess, is trusting your instinct, trusting your inner knowing when it comes to coming up with that vision and choosing what you want to do, and knowing that it's going to transform you and that it's going to require you to transform. That's kind of a loose interpretation. You could go probably different places with it. But so that was just a fun spread I wanted to share that I did, I think, once or twice and really liked, was to pull a card for what's the teacher, what's the lesson above, and the wisdom below of that. And, again, maybe it's making me think maybe the wisdom of doing this, of allowing things to transform and to look beyond the familiar and choose an intentional path forward towards a vision you want to create of your life, the wisdom of that can be strengthening that relationship with your inner knowing and trust, and also embracing the mystery of it all, of how everything winds up coming together, and kind of just trusting that if you choose the path and are open to transformation, that you will get there wherever it is that you're aiming to get. And then another fun thing to do is just look at the bottom of the deck, and maybe underneath all this is having to confront some darkness, and then you could just go off and continue to expand the reading if you want. That's the other thing I would say is like, sometimes I'll pull cards and just let it expand, and when you allow yourself to sit with the cards for a few days, you might come back to it in a day or two and be like, oh, I want to ask another question in relationship to this. You can leave those cards out and pull more and then add to your journal. It doesn't have to be. I think for a while I was at a place where I would pull cards and I felt a little rigid in how I would do things, and I'd want to shuffle them all back before I asked a new question. But sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes you're working through something, like I said, unraveling or untangling the chain. And so, yeah. Hopefully that was a little helpful, a little insightful, and perhaps even a little bit fun to see my practice and how it particularly evolved here. And if you have any questions, let me know down below. I'll either, maybe it's something I could just answer in the comments, or it will give me a reason to do a follow-up video. I don't know. But yeah, that was pretty much the practice and how I let it work. Like I said, I have those additional things that I use, the candles and ambient music and fragrance, to kind of get me in the headspace. And then I would just pull cards, whether I was using prompts or not, and sit with my journal and spend time just pouring out onto the pages and really trying to integrate it. The last thing I want to mention with the journals, I really think that's very important. I don't think I would get nearly as much out of this work if I wasn't sitting down to journal, to put the impressions and messages that I get from the card from the cards into words, and to relate them to things, and to really take the time to document. And some of that is for retention, because you might pull a spread and it's very profound. But, if you don't write it down and a couple weeks go by or a month go by, I feel like you don't retain it as much. And I think the act of writing, we know neurologically when it comes to retention, that's, as far as I know, is still scientifically the better way to retain information than to, say, type it out, or to just have a Google Doc and highlight things or whatever. There's something about actually writing things out, and then writing out the guidance and really phrasing it in a way where you're taking some ownership of things and taking, in some sense, some responsibility, but also you're owning the guidance and phrasing it to embrace it. And just to practice that through writing, I think adds a lot. So that's the summary here. That's the practice portion. I've had to film this more than once, so hopefully it came out okay this time. And my nails, I've had to do these several times. If I can put in a better video to show my nails, because I really wanted them to match for this video. And I had to do them several times because life has been lifing, and they keep getting messed up before I get a chance to do the video. So thank you so much for watching. Do leave a like if you enjoyed this, and subscribe if you want to see more videos from me, and let me know, anything, your thoughts down below, how you practiced. Do you think journaling is an important part of the way you practice with your cards? For me, it's been the most important part. I'm not sure I would get nearly as much out of the cards without that. So I hope you have a lovely day, evening, or whatever it is by you, and I will catch you in the next one.